Welcome to a tutorial video on learning Python. In this video I'm going to talk about functions. In programming terminology, a function is some collection of code that does something. It is incredibly vague, but what it allows us to do is break up larger chunks of code into smaller sections for individual tasks or to do an individual thing. That is, it allows us to somehow reuse parts of code if we want to, as well as helps us organize and better structurally contain code in different ways. Let's look at some examples in Python here. So I'm going to jump down to lines 5 and 6 first before we talk about functions to help us work into this concept. In lines 5 and 6 we saw right here a variable number set to a value 1, 2, 3, 4 and a variable integer set to a value 1.2. As a review, Python is a loosely typed language, which means we can put any different values we want into variables. So we see here lines 5 and 6, two different variables, number and integer, and their values 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1.2 respectively. So a function, as I talked about, is some collection of code that does something. So let's look at how we can define functions syntactically in Python. That is, what's the little bits that go into how we write a function. So on line 2 and 3, we have a function here in Python. In Python, functions start with the keyword def. That is, it's defining something. So we see def, the name of the function, in this case display, open and closing parentheses, enclosing what we're going to call the thing we send into the function. So when we talk about functions as a sidebar here, we can send data into functions and we can get data out of functions. This helps us when we just want to describe smaller tasks or break up a complex project into smaller parts. We can use functions to do that. So the thing we're sending into the function, its argument or parameter, is right here called item. So we can use the variable item within the function to describe what we're sending into it. Finally, we have a colon. This says anything after this that is indented is part of this function until it is no longer indented. So Python cares about whitespace. So you'll notice here that there's whitespace on line 3. After the colon, this defines one functionality is going to be part of this. So we see here print is part of the function body that is part of the function and is code that is run within that. So definition, the name of the function, in this case display, what we're sending into it inside parentheses, a colon, and then code within it. In this case, print whatever is sent into this, item to item. So we have some of the basics here of how a function is defined. Let's talk about how a function works. So I mentioned at the top lines 5 and 6. So remember, we have these variables with these values in play here. So coming down on lines 8 and 9, we are using this function. In programming terminology, this is often called running a function. So we're calling a function. So we're calling a function, we're saying, hey, here's some values, do something. Or hey, do something right here. So we're display, sending in a value, number, hopefully it's highlighted this for us here. We see numbers equal 1, 2, 3, 4. So sending in 1, 2, 3, 4, which is now the value of the variable item. So we've passed a value into this function, and inside this function it says print whatever we sent to it, item to item here. So we're sending in number, the value of number becomes the value of item, and then we're printing item. Then on line 9, we're doing the same to integer, sending the value of the variable integer into the function. It now becomes the value of the variable item, and we're printing that. So let's run this so we can see that. See, we see the first two over here on the right hand side, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1.2, which is what we expected to see. We sent the value of the variables into those functions, and inside that function, it printed those values for us. Moving down to lines 11 and 12, we can also, as I mentioned, get data out of functions. In our first example, display, we weren't getting data out of it. We're sending data in and it was doing something, but we weren't returning any data. So if we want to return data, we use the return keyword in Python. So we're defining def, a function called add2. The thing we're going to send in is going to be called number. We see a colon. We see some white space indented in. And in this case, we see the keyword return, which says whatever this thing is after this keyword, that's what's going to be the result of calling this function. So we're sending something into the function, getting data back out of the function. So we see here return number plus 2. Number is a variable defined here, so whatever we send into this becomes number, and we're returning the result of number plus 2. Let's look at line 14. We see new number, a variable, is equal to, so it will be assigned something, some value, the result of add2, a function, which we're sending number. Number up here is 1, 2, 3, 4, so the value of the variable number sent into the function add2, which becomes number inside the function add2. We're adding 2 to it, and we're then returning that result. Then down here, we're calling display, sending in new number, which becomes the value of the variable item, and then we're printing item, which we see over here on the right-hand side, 1, 2, 3, 6, which is 2 plus 1, 2, 3, 4. So as you might make the connection then, the print thing we've been using through the last couple of videos is in fact a function. It's a system function, and we can use it to print values, to show us values over here on the command line or the side here that we're using to display values. So print is a system function that exists. However, we can define our own, and you notice I defined display and add2. You may have also made the connection that we can then take the result of a function, use it in another function, and do more things with it. This allows us to take functions and use those to break up complex projects, as I mentioned earlier in this video, into smaller tasks, and then use those tasks to do different things. So we can break up large projects into small parts that interlock and work together, or what we call those in programming functionality, functions. Different functions that add up to a larger functionality. So let's review all of this. When we're defining a function, we use the def keyword. We're defining something. We have the name of the function, display, what we're going to call anything we send into it, in this case item, is in parentheses, a colon that says anything after this is going to be part of a function as long as it is indented. We're indenting one line, and we're saying print item. So whatever value we send into this becomes the value of the variable item, and in this case we're printing item. Down here in add2, we did a similar thing, but we're using the return keyword because we want to get data out of this function. We can send data in, get data out. So we can send data in using number, we're adding 2 to whatever is sent in, and we're getting that result. As we saw down here with new number, we can then save that result and display it, sending data into display, which then calls print, chaining functionality together through using different functions to create a larger functionality. Thanks for watching.